Hurricane Ian battered Florida and South Carolina, and the federal government responded by saying Ian ends discussion about man-made climate change. But does it really? Or are there more nefarious forces at work here? Hurricane Ian was a large and destructive Category 4 Atlantic hurricane. It was also the deadliest hurricane to strike the state of Florida since the 1935 Labor Day hurricane. More than 100 people were killed by the Category 4 storm, as rescue teams are still conducting their final search for victims. According to Joe Biden, Hurricane Ian ends discussion on climate change.
There's a lot going on. And I think the one thing this has finally ended is a discussion about whether or not there's climate change and we should do something about it.
While there can be no doubting the scale of the carnage wrought by Hurricane Ian, does Hurricane Ian really end discussion on the contentious issue of climate change? Educator and activist Peggy Hall has unearthed US government documents from over 50 years ago showing that the US government has admitted to manipulating hurricanes and forest fires for its own benefit. According to the documents, the Department of the Navy and the Department of the Air Force, along with General Electric, worked together to manipulate hurricanes. This bombshell information was unearthed by Hall in a paper published by General Electric titled History of Project Cirrus from 1947 to 1952, which was a study of how cloud particles and cloud modifications can affect hurricanes. Why would the government attempt to manipulate the weather? Hall says the purpose of government hurricane and forest fire manipulation is to instill fear, uncertainty, and inflict hardship on certain population centres, with the purpose of gaining control over people by using FEMA and federal funding.
The government admits to manipulating hurricanes. Now, for you, my smart, savvy, supportive, sometimes snarky, healthy Americans, that is probably no news to you. You know that weather manipulation has been around for a long time. And the question people have is, Peggy, why in the world would the government want to do that? Why would the government want to manipulate the weather? Why would the government intentionally seek to harm us? Well, if you've been awake and aware and alert for the last 2.5 years, you know exactly what's going on. You know that the government wants to control us, not only the weather, it wants to control us. And it wants to create and instill a sense of fear and terror and dread, so that when people are uprooted, they are going to experience a hardship, not only emotionally, physically, financially, spiritually, socially, economically. But don't just take my word for it or my opinion. Now we're going to actually dive in to the facts and the evidence. So the first thing I'm going to do is I need to find all of this that got deleted. Okay, here's what I want to do. I'm going to take you right on over, and you are going to see a document. Well, let me take you right on over and we'll take a look there. And here we go. We're hopping right on over, and this is the Comptroller General of the United States. This is a document in 1972. It's a response to an inquiry made by a senator, Senator Schweiker. And it says, this is in response to your request of September 22nd. So think about that. How many years ago is that? 1971, about 50 years ago, for certain background information on cloud seeding activities carried out in the United States under programs supported by federal agencies. And I'm going to show you a second document that is very, very compelling. But here I wanted to direct you where he is saying, yes, indeed, we have had federal agencies involved in cloud seeding and on the types of chemicals used for their seeding and their effect on the environment. We also obtained data concerning the extent of cloud seeding conducted over Pennsylvania. All right, this is, 50 years ago, and I just want to show you that it's on the record. So here's what I want to direct your attention to. Okay, several federal agencies support weather modification programs, period. There, the government is on record stating that they modify the weather. And this goes back many, many, many decades. This is just something that I pulled up and wanted to share with you. So major research programs, and this is 50 years ago, so you know that it's been accelerated. Why in the world would it go backwards? Here we go. It includes precipitation modification. Now, we don't know whether that means to reduce it or increase it. Fog and cloud modification, hail suppression, and lightning and hurricane modification. There you go. The name of my broadcast today is The Government Admits to Modifying and Manipulating and Controlling Hurricanes. And here you go. So I want to show you, here it is, lightning modification, hurricane modification. Now, this is 50 years ago, so the numbers, probably are much larger these days. And there have been different agencies that have been involved. Here we go. Several, different federal agencies. The research I did previously said that it was the Department of the Navy, the Department of the Air Force, the General Electric, and that's what I want to show you next. That's not a federal agency, but it might as well be one because of all of the money and all of the research that it does for the government. It's basically like a quasi-government. Now, what I want to show you here, it says various methods are used to seed clouds from either the air or the ground. In aerial seeding, flares containing silver iodide, the most commonly used seeding material in the United States. They are ignited and dropped from a plane, or propane generators, or they're attached to the wings of a plane. Propane generators attached to the wings of a plane are used to burn acetone with silver iodide to produce nuclei which are delivered at controlled rates into the clouds. Now, I'm not going to get too technical, but the point I wanted to make is that the government does admit to manipulating weather, including hurricanes. Hurricane Betsy was an intense and destructive tropical cyclone that brought widespread damage to areas of Florida and the central United States Gulf Coast in September of 1965. Now, look at this. The storm's erratic nature, meaning it did not follow what typical hurricanes had done before. And it also says it was the first tropical cyclone in the Atlantic basin to accrue at least $1 billion in damage in 1965. All right, that is nearly 60 years ago. And this is just a few years after they had started doing all of this hurricane manipulation. This is General Electric, and I am going to direct you, we're going to hop on over to page 70, but first, because that's where they're talking about hurricanes. Here we go. History of Project Cirrus. This went on from 1947 to 1952. Project Cirrus, initiated in 1947 under this contract from the government, was established to cover research study of cloud particles and cloud modifications. It continued through the life of several government contracts ending in 1952. Now, there have been many additional contracts, but this is something that came to my attention as one of the first visible contracts. So think again, 1952, how many years is that? Is that 60, 70, 18, is that 70 years ago? Yeah, 70 years ago. So we know that they have accelerated since then. I'm going to leave this for you because I'm going to dig in myself. I want to learn all about the gas masks and the smoke generators and nucleation. And look at this, Vonnegut's early work. This is actually the writer Kurt Vonnegut's brother was the researcher of all of this. I find that very strange as well. I should make myself a note to do a video about Vonnegut because I think he probably was a government agent designed to write books that would manipulate the culture as well. Have to dig into that. I'll make myself a note. Langmuir is one of the first scientists he was a Nobel Peace Prize winner. You know what that doesn't mean very much. And I don't know if it was a Peace Prize or just maybe a Nobel Prize in Science. I might have misspoken. But he was one of the first people to do all of the cloud seeding and, again, probably a government agent. But here's what I want to show you. So they talk all about ground operations, weather station, dry ice dispenser, silver iodide generators, cloud meter. Here's what I want to show you. We're going to scroll down to number 7. And that is, number 8, hurricanes and forest fires. The storm consisted of an eye approximately 30 miles in diameter, surrounded by a thick wall of clouds extending from about 800 feet up into the cirrus, overcast at 20,000 feet. Okay, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so this is, which storm was this? Okay, it was planned to study a young storm as soon as possible after it had assumed the form of a hurricane. All right, let's go on. Okay. After a brief reconnaissance flight around the outer wall, the decision was made to seed a track over the uppermost cloud shelf and at a distance from the center sufficient to permit the control aircraft to fly contact 5,000 feet above the seeding aircraft. So, friends, this requires a little bit deeper digging, and I plan to do so, but I wanted to establish for you and answer the question that was on everybody's mind who was emailing me. Yes, indeed, the government does manipulate these hurricanes.
It turns out that the practice of seeding clouds with silver and lead iodide is nothing new. During the Vietnam War, the US military conducted geoengineering weather modification as a strategy to muddy the supply roads on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, causing it to rain with cloud seeding. The chemical weather modification program was conducted from Thailand over Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam, and was allegedly sponsored by the then Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, and the CIA.
Military victory or defeat can depend on the weather. A commander who can control the weather has a weapon as powerful as any air force. During the Vietnam War, the U.S. military began seeding clouds along the Ho Chi Minh Trail to create floods and wash out North Vietnamese supply routes. It was known as Operation Popeye, and crews flew over 2,000 spray missions.
I was told initially by a friend, he said his brother was in the military service. He said when there is these heavy spray days, when there's lots of persistent contrails to keep his family inside, when they were outside exposed, to have them go in and take showers. And he couldn't talk about it. He couldn't explain more than that.
We have extensive studies that the civilian aircraft, the airliners, were laying plumes that basically dissipated within seconds to 2 minutes. The military aircraft in the same airspace laid plumes lasting 4 to 8 hours. The weather conditions are the same. The plumes are entirely different. One is civil and one is military. Something is going on.
Dave Dickey also believes the U.S. military is behind a lot of the chemtrail activity. He claims to have seen 2 very suspicious contrails while touring a civilian airport.
It was actually the day we spotted 2 aircraft, 2 KC-135s, and it was call sign Petro 011 and Petro 012. The air traffic controllers were kind of showing us how the tower worked, and they identified these 2 aircraft as 2 American military KC-135s. And what we could see was a contrail. We couldn't see the aircraft. It was just amazing to watch the grid patterns that the KC-135s were leaving.
People who research chemtrails are convinced there's a conspiracy underway to change the weather.
Then, in 2017, the mainstream finally caught up with so-called conspiracy theorists. Weather manipulation jumped from conspiracy theory into mainstream reality as Congress held its first hearing on geoengineering, with the US House Subcommittee on Environment and Subcommittee on Energy hearing discussing how the government secretly controls the weather.
Good morning, and welcome to the Joint Environment Subcommittee and Energy Subcommittee hearing on geoengineering. I thank each of our witnesses for being here today. And since this is the first time we're discussing the topic of geoengineering this Congress, it is important to explain what geoengineering actually is. In its simplest terms, geoengineering is the concept of using scientific understanding to alter the atmosphere in a way that produces positive outcomes and results. Many of the concepts in this field deal with solar radiation management or how to influence the effects of the sun on the Earth. But the field is by no means limited to solar research. Geoengineering can also be used to manipulate different levels of gases in the atmosphere, such as carbon dioxide. These avenues of geoengineering research and others are still in the early developmental stage, and any or all of them may warrant further exploration. While there are at least a few programs in our nation's universities that are looking into these concepts, federal research is still limited. However, if in the future the government wants to actually apply the concepts and findings of geoengineering research, we must fully examine both the potential merits and potential pitfalls of this emergent field.
All of which raises the question, why is the government modifying the weather? Using cloud seeding to gain an advantage over a foreign enemy is one thing, but modifying hurricanes and forest fires in the US is another thing entirely. America has been battered by hurricanes in the last few years, and forest fires have become an existential threat for those living in certain parts of the country. Now that we know the government have admitted they control hurricanes and forest fires, we deserve to know what exactly they are doing with these powers. Because, reading between the lines, it sounds like the Biden administration are using hurricanes and forest fires to build the case for draconian climate change solutions, including carbon taxes, rolling climate lockdowns, and a green Sabbath. Of course, the proposed solutions to the climate crisis are nothing less than tools to achieve absolute control over humanity. In a recently unearthed video, Bill Gates admits to his inner circle that clean energy is a scam and doesn't fix the climate crisis whatsoever.
It's 22 gigawatts rate over 3 days. You know, tell me what battery solution is going to sit there and provide that power. I mean, let's not joke around. You're multiple orders of magnitude, you know, $100 per kilowatt hour. That's nothing. That doesn't solve the reliability problem. And remember, electricity is 25% of greenhouse gas emissions. Whenever we came up with this term clean energy, I think it screwed up people's minds because now they don't understand.
The past 2 years have been a checklist for the worst impulses of authoritarian far-left governments, and the public are growing wise to the ruse. COVID allowed for supposedly temporary measures to morph into 2 years of emergency restrictions. According to those in the know, COVID was only the warm-up, and another proclaimed crisis is set to be the main event. All the signs are pointing towards climate change being that crisis.